Forget the Grand National, forget the Masters, forget the Champions League or the Premier League title race between Liverpool and Manchester City, because the Australian Grand Prix is back. And with me to talk about it all is Mr. Freddie Coates and Mr. Adam Dickinson. This is the Winging It F1 podcast. How are you guys doing this week?
Oh, we're talking about the F1. I thought we were talking about the Formula E because you forgot about it.
I did, yeah.
I'm good, thank you, by the way.
Nice. Adam?
Yeah, I thought we were talking about the F1 because I'm not as big a Formula E fan as Freddie, but I'm still okay. I don't have, that's not linked to my well-being. It's just, separate fact. I'm good.
Right. Well, we're also
Formula E is not in a good place. So.
Yeah. Before we get onto the return of Melbourne to the calendar, we first got to talk about the big news from last week, or since we last did a podcast, which is the Las Vegas Grand Prix. It's going to join the schedule next year in November. It will be at night on a Saturday as well, the first Saturday race since 1985. Thoughts on this, guys? It was kind of split from what I saw on social media. Are you guys happy or unhappy about this news?
I think it's a positive. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
No splits here. I think F1, if F1 wants to establish itself more in the US, I think it's doing a good job of it so far. But I think it's not always easy to be an F1 fan in the US when you're waking up at like 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. for a lot of the European races. And I think if you're wanting to kind of build that out, then you need to be giving more back to fans and giving them more of a reason to watch. And this is exactly what it does. I think now you've got between Miami here, Montreal and Austin, then you've got a decent kind of geographic spread. Covers a fair amount of the US and probably puts decent amount of major cities within about a day's drive of a Grand Prix. And yeah, I think it's needed. I don't know whether the track's going to be any good or not yet. None of us do, but I think it seems to be more thought through than the last time they went to Vegas, and I think it's going to be good. I'm looking forward to it from a distance. I don't think I'll be coming back to watch it. That'd be very nice if I was, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what you kind of thought from being in America, but you covered that really there, Adam. But kind of like, yeah, exactly what you said. You've got Miami on one side, and you've got about 1,000 odd miles to Austin, and then probably another 1,000 odd miles out to Vegas. So it's kind of perfect split through that eastern, central, western kind of zone for it, which works really well. F1 in the States has really kind of is sort of trying to emulate the Premier League in the States, which used to be kind of, from what I've kind of been reading a lot this week, there's been a lot published about this and a lot of comment on this from people who have followed the rise of sports in the States. And they've gone from very fringe to now it's very common for people in the States to have a English football team and go to their local pub really on the weekend to watch a game. And it's getting there with F1 was the fringest of fringe sports 15, 20 years ago, where people would just say to you, did you mean NASCAR? Whereas now, even in such a competitive primetime sports market, maybe the primetime lack of really helps F1, but where you got so many NASCAR races, you've got still growing IndyCar calendar, like 16, 17 races, and with its own flagship Indy 500 event anyway. On top of that, with all the other sports you get in the States being so well loved, it's a hard market to crack. And F1's been doing a very good job at that. And like you say, Adam, giving a bit back, it seems to be perfect. We forget how good we have it in Europe. This is 3 different time zones for 3 races. How many time zones in Europe are in the same? How many races in the same time zone in Europe? Probably 5 or 6 anyway. Yeah, at least.
At least a lot. I think that. Oh no, you go.
I'm not convinced by Las Vegas yet. I'm not sure if F1 needs a further race in America. For me,
all the reasons we just said are why we think it does work.
Yeah, but I would prioritise Africa over Las Vegas. And if an African Grand Prix is now being put on the back foot because of this, I'm not sure if that's right. And the same with if we lose, I don't know, a circuit like Spa or something that's out of contract this year. If we lose a great track because of Las Vegas, I'm not on board with that, personally.
I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. Personally, I think you can.
At the moment, F1's limited to 24 races, and even with Russia going, with Las Vegas joining the schedule and China coming back next year, one race on this year's calendar is definitely Qatar as well. At least one race is going to be wiped off. So,
in that case, I'm getting more annoyed at the races that are on here that I don't think should be on here. That like say, some of the Middle Eastern races say, or I don't think it's. I think this will bring more to F1 as a sport than those are the races. And I think we should be racing in Africa as well. But I think you can do both and still have a great calendar. I don't think you need. I think Vegas will bring a lot, and it's. I think it's about a 6-hour drive from LA. It's as opposed to a 3-hour flight that costs a lot more to get to Austin. Like, I think it opens up F1 a lot more in the US, and that that can bring the advantage and bring money in that maybe you don't need to race in Qatar and Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia.
When there's an audience growing, you see floods. And Zandvoort, I think, is a prime example for that, where there's an audience that suddenly boomed, then not necessarily suddenly it's dormant, but that grows and is growing. That has brought on a race in the Dutch Grand Prix, and it was a wild success. And the Dutch fans then, in that kind of regard, then also kind of saved the Belgian Grand Prix because it's a close race. It's still quite a trek, but it's a close race. And you've got it from that kind of side where with Vegas, it's a growing market and people will flood to it and it will grow even more from that perspective. So I think there's a lot to be said for putting Vegas in for that kind of reason.
I think it feels Western bias almost, because if we had 3 races in, let's say, China or backlash just because it's China, I think because it's America, people are almost on board of it more because of this almost Western bias that we've got. And I can't help but feel that F1 should be focusing more on new locations or keeping these iconic tracks like Spa and stuff like that, rather than having another street circuit. We've already got Jeddah. We were meant to have Vietnam. Why does it have to be another street circuit? Why can't we have permanent tracks? Just because USA has got loads of great tracks. I'd much rather have one of them instead.
I mean, they would be ruined though now by modern F1. I think Laguna Seca, Watkins Glen would be ruined by it, and I think it's the original Formula E argument, which is bring the racing to the people, and I think it goes back to Adam's first point of giving it to America, and it is a Western bias, and that is true, and it's because the Western bias is there because it's a economic driven decision. But I think that's the answer for that. From a market perspective, America is still for F1 untapped gold, and it's got potential to be diamonds beyond that. So I think that is the same for Africa, and I completely agree with you for Africa and for China. I think step at a time with that, because if the words are to be believed, there is a lot of attempts for Africa at the moment, and there is also for China. So it might just be that this is the first one announced because it's the easiest one to organize. I think we've got to watch a few spaces on this based on a few rumors.
I think as well, like, if you're going to take one out of the US, take out Miami. I think the Vegas Grand Prix will bring in a lot more as a spectacle for F1, as a kind of the catchment area that it covers than Miami will. And, I don't know if there's going to be that much difference between the tracks, but I think...
That would be a huge waste though, wouldn't it? Like, it's just come on the calendar and stuff to get rid of it.
Vegas has just come on the calendar as well.
That's not the point. That's not the point, but it's kind of like... yeah, I get what you're saying, Adam, about it's kind of like, it's a much more inspiring, much more evocative location. You look at Vegas and your thought, just the movies of Vegas for 50 years is that kind of city that's had such charm and character for so long, in a way that people look at Miami and you kind of think, oh, Miami, yeah, that was cool. And you also look at it for documentaries about prisons and stuff like that. You don't get that with Vegas. So
yeah, it's just like Oklahoma.
Wild generalizations from me here, but
I think the kind of, to me, the broader point seems to be where F1 wants to be as a sport, which, if I think, compared as a kind of spectacle and as a corporate entity, from when I started watching in 2007 to where it is now, it has come on so far. But I think it's events like this that will push that. And it's 10 years ago that there was the first race at COTA, and I don't think they even broke 100,000 ticket sales. And now I think they're on about 400,000 for COTA. They're really just, it's grown and grown. And it's now, just to have gone from where we were after F1 left Indy, and it was kind of, there wasn't a permanent American base and it had been jumping around for so long. I think now to kind of be at the position where you can grow, and have a set American Grand Prix is great. But I think the next step for that is really to go forward. And you can see, I think the Premier League analogy is great, Freddie. The one I was thinking of was the NFL in the UK, in that's kind of, wildly successful in its home market, but to keep growing, then it's needing to expand, and that's what they're doing, and they've done it very successfully. And I think there's, similarities as well in the US now. Being an F1 fan, I think it has a kind of niche mindset. I don't think it's but it is growing into a mass market, and I think that can kind of continue to go forward with racing in Vegas. And yeah, as I say, I think if they're gonna only have 2 races in the US, I think Vegas brings a lot more than Miami, and COTA's a fantastic track and good to have a track based or racing circuit based Grand Prix. But yeah, I think if F1 wants to carry on growing and kind of rival the other major sports really, and keep going, I don't know where it is on kind of the list of fans of sport worldwide, but if it wants to keep going up, these are the kind of events it needs to have.
I think there's just a couple of things on there's a few very quirks about this, about the Vegas race, and that it doesn't have a promoter. If you're unsure about sort of how F1 Grand Prix sort of work, there's usually a promoter organization who basically they get the money together, they pay F1 for the right to then host the race, then they sell the tickets and so on, they man the circuit, man all of that. And that's why Grand Prix happen in so many different places, and that's why there are all these contracts and deals and stuff with Grand Prix. And it was a big thing in the Bernie days to get promoters on his will, if that makes sense. And Vegas doesn't have a promoter. It's an F1 led event, and it's F1 are coordinated basically just with Vegas, and they have put on the event, and it's going to be put on by F1 in conjunction really with just Las Vegas authorities. So that's in a way it's a new model for or at least a return to some very, very, very 80s models for a few Grand Prix back then, in how a Grand Prix is staged. And if there's markets where Formula One is kind of wanting to go, there's not really a barrier now that can stop them if they're going to go with this model, in a way that, if from our perspective, if F1 say, yeah, we want to go to Africa, then we can now say to F1, oh, cool. How are you going to do that? If they then say something about promoters, then we could say, well, are you going to do it in this kind of way? And it's not a way. No, I don't really want to be going to us holding F1 to account, because it's not, they're not the government, but that's an entirely different form of journalism. But it's kind of like, it could be a positive for the way F1 goes about setting up races in the future, in my opinion.
Well, there's 4 events that are out of contract this year, and if one of them are to go, those 4 are Spa, Paul Ricard, Red Bull Ring, and Mexico City. Do you think Las Vegas deserves to be ahead of one of those 4?
Paul Ricard.
Yeah, Freddie?
Yeah.
I think there's a bigger audience. I think if we're going on every reason we've said for Vegas, I think there's definitely an audience in France, and that's a growing audience, in my opinion, in comparison to Austria.
And it's the home of where Grand Prix racing started, and there's loads of drivers from there. So
we've got two Grand Prix winners from France on the grid now. So I'm kind of looking at that and thinking, if we're just going off that, then yeah, race in France and Austria, as much as, people love Austria, and it does have its own F1 heritage, that's a lesser market for me.
But to cut in on that, I mean, you're saying about there's loads of Grand Prix drivers from F1, there's 2 race winners on the grid. If F1 wants to expand, then having an American driver will, help push that. And I think part of the reason
we've got 2 races there.
Part of the reason that America there's not been an American driver so far is because F1 hasn't had a kind of, continuous position or kind of presence in America. And if you look at the population centers, I think LA is the biggest or the second biggest city in America. You got San Francisco there as well, Las Vegas. I think to be touching those population centers, I think that's really significant. And that's, I think with France, you've got 2 races in Italy that's not that far away. You've got a race in Barcelona currently that, again, isn't far away in the south of France. You've got races in the north that aren't far away to go to. So I think kind of looking at that, I think having an American or having a presence out west is more significant. And I don't think you're losing loads. I know last season it was great at Paul Ricardo, and we'll see how it goes this season, but I don't think you're losing loads in racing action.
Yeah, but it's like the home of the FIA, and the first Grand Prix was there. There's a lot of history in France. For me, if one of those 4 races go because of Las Vegas, I don't think I can get on board with it. I don't think.
Yeah, I think they're all F1... I think they are all venues that have their own positivity, and I think really, to be honest, you can definitely, probably all but 1 or 2 tracks, you can say that there's positives to be had there from Formula One being at that track, in my opinion. And I think it's a really complicated line for Formula One to walk, and we can sit here and say lots of different arguments about why going different places, and we'll be going around in circles, in my opinion, if we start saying, well, Spa's got this, but Spa's got that.
Like they will be at the Vegas Grand Prix in 2023.
And as every Grand Prix in 2023. And where those
maybe
races
there's
are,
a point to point.
We don't know. And that's, to be honest, we've had seasons where Spa wasn't on the calendar. We've had seasons where Austria wasn't on the calendar. We've had many a season where Mexico City wasn't on the calendar, but they all are fantastic, and it would be a shame to see any of them go. And I don't really know where I stand on it until we have sort of a provisional 2023 calendar, which will be probably about August, it tends to be. So yeah, I reckon we hold fire until then, in my opinion, on this.
That's what I'm waiting for personally, because if one of those or 2 of those races go, then yeah, that's more. But if not, and we do end up having 25, 26 races instead, then that's a whole different talking point.
Yeah, I think quite with that. I mean, there's also kind of question marks about Spa safety in the wet, and that's not kind of to be addressed now. But has it? Yes. No. We spoke about this last year. Yeah. Ignore that then. But I think on what you're saying about kind of Paul Ricard and having a race in France, I don't think we're lacking in kind of historic venues for F1 in Europe and across the world. I think, you've already, especially in that batch of the calendar, I don't think you're missing out on massive slice of history there, given Imola, Monza, Silverstone, Suzuka, Interlagos.
It is something that is still
Monaco,
such loved in that kind of regard. Like, you can not have some history and have other history, but
is Paul Ricard loved?
France is loved, is the kind of thing with that. And it's like, if you go to the Italian Grand Prix, you don't sit there and go, France, what a great place for the history of motorsport. It's that kind of thing, because you're in Italy.
No, because it's in Italy.
Exactly. So that's what I mean. It's like, you can say to people, here's this slice of F1 history that we don't have anymore, but it's all right because you can go and watch the British Grand Prix.
Because you've got
someone in France,
10 other historic tracks, more historic tracks.
If you're a French person, you're going to be like, well, no, hang on a second. And I think if they did the same in the UK, if they got rid of the British Grand Prix, I would be really annoyed by that because I like the British Grand Prix.
Paul Ricard's not been hosting for 70 years.
Yeah, they had a massive chunk of a gap in France, and then it came back.
Yeah,
I mean, it came back, and everyone in France was really happy. So you look at it from that perspective. So there's so much to it, and we're going to be going around in circles, like I said. That's why I just put a pin in it, because it's just a boring argument in my opinion. But yeah.
Any final words, Adam, on this?
I just said let's stop it.
I said it all.
I'm stirring the pot. But yeah, we'll see.
But yeah, actually,
final words are.
I'd rather see them take out Jeddah or Abu Dhabi or Qatar or all of them. To be honest, that's my biggest point. But anyway.
Okay. Let's talk about the build-up to the Australian Grand Prix then. First thing is Sebastian Vettel is back after his coronavirus period. So he's back in the car for the first time since testing. How do you think he's going to go, and what should his targets be for this year, do we think? Freddie?
I think, first of all, great to see he's returned negative tests and that he's well again. It was obviously not great for him to have COVID. No one likes that. And hopefully he's had a good time to rest because, it's a horrible virus. But yeah, for Hope's returning to the car, I think we can't really expect too much because I think with every driver who's had COVID, when they've come back in, they've struggled a bit. Hamilton, Ricardo, Stroll, Perez back in 2020, and he hasn't had a long break at all. So I think it's going to be, on top of that, with a car that's presumably heavily revised since he drove it, that's going to be quite the ask. But hopefully, he acquits himself well. It's a track he's won at quite a few times, so he knows what he's doing there. So from that side of it, he would be all right. I think it's just a case of taking it easy, getting in slowly, and, come Saturday, being on decent pace, I think.
Yeah, I think in terms of where, I don't think kind of he'll be too far off his best. I think he'll be able to get back up to speed, and he did get the running at Bahrain. So yeah, but I've kind of got question marks as where Seb's best is now. I think kind of he looked happier and more comfortable at Aston Martin last year, but I don't think he kind of had regained the pace that he showed at his peak at Ferrari and Red Bull. And whether, I kind of, at his stage of the career, I don't know whether that's something that can be regained. So I think that's kind of my bigger worry, is not necessarily how kind of COVID has affected him so much as just how long the passage of time has affected him.
Do you think, Adam, that this will be Vettel's last season in F1?
Oh, yeah,
no,
conversations leaked.
I think he'll stick around, but I don't think it's crazy to be having that conversation. And yeah, I can see it being one of his last ones, whether it's kind of one of three, one of two. I don't know, but yeah, that's kind of my thoughts.
Yeah, I get that as well. Only a driver of the sort of stature and proven pace of Sebastian Vettel can have seasons like he's had in 2020 specifically, where he's shown decent signs in 2021. Hopefully he can do that in 2022, because his 2021 season, he was a deserving F1 driver. In 2020, he wasn't. Simple as, really. And hopefully 2022, he can be performing well. I think you're going to find a driver who's going to want to be on F1, want to be on the F1 grid. I think Seb's going to be the one. He is the guy who'd be able to, if you were to go to the paddock and, we have nerdy conversations about, I don't know, the 1989 French Grand Prix or something ridiculous, which was, I know about that race. That's a very good race, actually. But anyway, you go to sort of 19 out of 20 drivers, they probably wouldn't be able to have an eyelid about that. Whereas you could probably be fairly sure that you'd be able to chat to Sebastian Vettel about it. So he's such a fan of the sport. And I think that's why he's so loved, because he is just he's sort of one of us, if you will. Not that they're not, the rest aren't, but yeah. And I think he will try hard to stay on the F1 grid and to improve his pace. And, we'll have to wait and see. We haven't seen him turn a wheel in anger in 2022. So, you've got to give him the benefit of the doubt for at least a few races.
I think I can't see him kind of minding being at the back of the pack that much. I think he just likes F1, likes being in F1. And if Aston Martin are as not competitive as they've shown so far, then I don't think that will kind of phase him, really. Nigel?
I think it's hard to see him getting back towards how he was at his best years at Ferrari and definitely Red Bull. I do fear he's going to be a bit like Ricardo and just... Yes. It's quite clear that he's far off his best and he might stick around for a year or two too long. That is my one worry because, he might have a couple of great moments this year, but I don't see that consistency being there. So that is my worry with Vettel. And if he is at the back, then it could be a pretty quiet season for him. And
do we think it's his performance? Do you think the performance issues are because he's at the back? Like you saw the sort of drop in 2020 because that car just was nothing, and Ferrari basically pushed him aside, and then it looked like he just dropped. And then he comes in 2021, and he has two races where he's noticeably very good, which is Baku and Hungary, and those are races where he's actually in a decent position in the field. And a race he also did well in with Spa qualifying, probably could have done well there as well because there's a time to shine. So do we think being at the back is what's a psychological block, say, for an instinct?
I think there's something about his driving style where he doesn't work as a midfield driver. And I think Leclerc to some extent has got this problem as well. I think there's some drivers who are better at the front, whether it's because they struggle to follow a car or the driving style doesn't work when they're in close combat and stuff like that. And I think Vettel is one of those drivers. I don't think he can show his best when he's got cars around him and stuff like that. I think he needs that clean air and he needs, that kind of support from the team as well, and that motivation to win and get podiums. So, I would agree. That statement fits Vettel, I think.
I think it's kind of maybe a bit underrated how good he was at wheel-to-wheel in the early part of his career. It was kind of in vogue, especially kind of, towards the end of his 4 championships with Red Bull. It was kind of, he just goes on pole and wins. But I think that was because he was so fast and so good at qualifying. And even in the races where he wasn't in that position, then he'd still do well. But they just made up a minority of the season for him because he was that good. So I think that kind of is maybe, overspun as a narrative. But I think you could kind of see the signs of this from 2019. I think when Leclerc came in and was kind of on his pace pretty quickly and he finished 5th in the Drivers' Championship. And I think that I think that was kind of the beginning of that, but it has accelerated as the teams that he's been in have dropped back into the midfield. So, that's kind of where I am on it.
Maybe because he was at the front for so long for Red Bull, he had very few years when he was in the midfield, apart from the Toro Rosso year. And now he is in the midfield, so he's having to get used to that, like a new driver would. Maybe that's a factor as well.
I feel like that's a bit too much. I think if you're an F1 driver, you can drive fast in an F1 car, whether you're in the midfield or not. Like, I find that a hard.
It's a mentality, though. It's different, isn't it?
I find it a hard. It is a mentality, but I don't think it's anything to do with driving style. I think maybe the mentality of I'm not fighting for the win just means that you're not going to push for 2 or 3 extra tenths, and I think that's really quite understandable. And if you're a driver who's the 3rd on the all-time list for wins and podiums and all of that, then I don't know, 7th isn't that great. So I can completely understand if your head's dropped and your motivation's a bit less, because that's fair enough.
Yeah, I don't think you'd see a title fight is the crucible, and that's where it's the most intense and the most white hot, and that's kind of where the most motivation comes from. But I don't think that's kind of a particularly Seb thing compared to the other drivers he's racing against, really. I think the only other thing for me on Seb is, like, you can see when there's been wet races or sessions over the last few years, he's generally done well. So I think, and that's kind of, yeah, you know, I think that's, you know, that can be one of the best markers of where a driver's at in terms of, you know, kind of whether they've still got that natural ability. And I think he's still got that kind of deep down, but it just seems to be, like you say, when you add everything else into that and kind of, you know, he seems to have done best over the last few years when you stripped everything back, as opposed to, you know, when it's kind of been the full package. And that's just kind of the worry from me. But he's still got good results in him, because when there's a wet race, he's competitive.
It's really interesting to compare Vettel to an Alonso, because when Alonso's sort of been in one of these, in a backmarket car or a lot of front-running car, as he has been for the past sort of 8 years of his career, 9 years, you could say. He's still got that battling samurai about him, that he's still wringing the neck of a car. And it seems like that's the only way you can drive. Whereas with Vettel, I mean, there's always been the very thoughtful driver. But so it's kind of interesting to sort of see if that approach is different, and goes back to what you were saying, Nigel, about midfield prowess being a bit more kind of, you've got to have be a battling driver in the fierce midfield, and there's a bit more approach for an intellectual driver higher up the field. And maybe there's more just the case, if you're going to be an intellectual driver, you've got to be sort of ferocious as well. But then that means that some drivers aren't ferocious, but they all are, and it all becomes a bit muddled. But yes, what do you think on that, what I've just said?
Well, I think
it was deluded.
I think in the midfield, raw speed is not as important, and I think Alonso doesn't have that one lap pace. So I think that is, you know, it's better to have better race management, tyre management, and just that ability to kind of attack and go for it. And I think that's where someone like Alonso has really thrived in the last 7, 8, 9 years, and Vettel doesn't quite have that quality, I don't think. So I think that is where he's been let down. I think so. If you just look at his best races last year, Hungary and Baku, he was already towards up there, and he didn't have to exactly battle his way through. He was already in like the top 10 kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I think that is just his style.
And Monaco, actually, for that matter.
Yeah, Monaco as well.
Yeah,
I think it's important for F1 drivers to be fast.
It is.
See, I don't.
Extra.
Discuss.
No, I completely see what you're saying. I think it's like you say, kind of, or like both of you said, the comparison to Alonso is interesting, and I don't know. I think, do we all seem to be on the same page?
I think we all
Vettel?
are. I think it's fascinating to explore it.
Yeah, definitely.
Drivers can perform so well, but then also not. But what? And you kind of look at it and I think Vettel, I don't want to say was phenomenal, because I think he still is phenomenal. It's just the phenomenon is phenomenal-less. So it's a bit interesting. You can't take away the fact that he was, for a time, the best driver in Formula One. You can't take that away from him. But then it's kind of like these things go in cycles.
Steps.
Yeah. And that's I think it comes back to what you said at the start, really, Adam. Passage of time.
Do you want to play guess how many Grand Prix Vettel's raced in? Closest wins.
Let's play that 10-second game. I'm going to guess
284. No, 264.
290.
Maths. Nigel's closer.
What was
it?
But
Freddie would have been if he hadn't changed. It's 279 and then 280 entries because
he entered the Bahrain Grand Prix 2016. Yes. There
we go.
Fun.
Another driver who almost fits into that category of doing well but not doing well is Daniel Ricciardo. It's his home race, his first home race for 3 years now. He actually had a pretty good weekend in Saudi Arabia despite his retirement. Bit off the pace of Bahrain. I think it's too early to judge him after 2 races.
And his immediate COVID recovery.
Yeah, that as well. What are we expecting from him this weekend on home soil?
Hopefully more of the Saudi performance. because he was very good there and he was, did the job. And that McLaren looked like it was in good positions because of Norris and Ricardo. And then Ricardo unfortunately broke down. So hopefully more of the same in Australia. I think there was a few times in Australia, I think it was 2017 and 2019 particularly, where he didn't have the best performances. And it did seem to kind of look that the home race pressure got to him a bit, which is something that was never really spoken about until then, but really makes a lot of sense. And I don't know whether because there's such a buzz around the Australian Grand Prix returning and with it sort of what it sort of symbolizes from a COVID perspective, because for me, globally, really, from a Western perspective, at least for me, the Australian Grand Prix cancellation was the start of sort of, oh, we have to take this seriously, COVID, rather than, oh, COVID's a thing, if that makes sense. So it's sort of the symbolic nature of this is we're out the other side. And I don't know whether that's going to then play on everything with this Grand Prix. And that just gives a bit of a weight for me on Daniel Ricciardo, because this Grand Prix for Australia is so big. But I think he has the pace this year.
I think on that, where McLaren's position will actually help him, I think, because he's not coming in where he's been with Red Bull over, or kind of when he was in a race winning position with Red Bull, but also kind of with Renault, where it was the start of the season, they were kind of hoping to be battling in the top 5 and around the podium. I think with where McLaren are, then I think there'll be less of that. People want him to do well, but doing well is finishing in the points, really, or finishing in the top 8, or it's kind of that kind of level of expectation has dropped. He's never had a podium in Australia thanks to his disqualification in 2014. So yeah,
no Australian driver has, I think.
No.
Yeah, good fact that. And I think the high speed or the new layout of this high speed Albert Park circuit is going to help McLaren, because it's the slow corners where they are absolutely atrocious, quite frankly, and they're going to have to make the most of it this weekend with this high speed circuit. So there is a chance for Ricardo to get points. I think he can score. In fact, I'll say I think he will score his first points of the season this weekend.
But you're going to go for podium then?
No.
I was like, have you gone mad?
I think there's a good chance for points. I agree. I mean, when you had Lando Norris legitimately fighting an Alpine last time out, Alpine who have convincingly, really, in Saudi and in Saudi, definitely best of the rest, arguably as a team behind Ferrari and Red Bull, at least in qualifying pace. You kind of think that's pretty good looking for McLaren, considering where they were in Bahrain. So I'd say, they'll definitely be in the fight for points. I think I wanted to go well for Danny Rick. I think he's had a hard time of it. I know he's had a hard time of it. We all know he's had a hard time of it. And if anywhere for him to have a good result, it's the return of his home track.
Yeah, I think actually, as a side note, I think Alpine are another team we want discussion, seeing as where they've gone from testing to the track, but we're not going to have time for that this time because we've waffled so much on Vettel in Las Vegas. But yeah, I think the ingredients are there for it to be a good weekend for Ricardo, but at the same time, I'm still not ready to let go of how poor he was last season and kind of just completely count that off. So I think this is going to be this is kind of going to say which was the exception and which was the rule of the first two races of the season. So yeah, it's kind of, I think it's TBC where I stand on him, really.
I think the fact that
I don't stand on him
the day
physically.
Basically the day before the season, he still had COVID. I think for me that kind of lends itself to hopefully Saudi being the rule and Bahrain being the exception in that. So because he didn't have any time in the car in Bahrain until practice 1, everyone else had such a good position there, just personally for driving the car, at least apart from Nico Hülkenberg. And then the car wasn't very good. So that's just on top of COVID soporificness, which is a thing. Like, I don't really know anyone who's been positive with COVID who then, when they've been negative, has been as sprightly as the day is young. But I don't know if that's a phrase. I made it up on the spot. But I think, yes, I think he had definitely had a right to not to be good in Bahrain because of where he was. And I think he'll definitely be performing better here, in my opinion.
Yeah. And Ricardo is going to be in that super competitive midfield battle, which is going to be separated by, 3 or 4 tenths, perhaps, which will be the difference between getting into Q3 and getting knocked out in Q1, quite frankly. So whether he can be on the right side of that tenth, we'll find out. But who is going to be a team to beat this weekend? Is it going to be Ferrari? Is it going to be Red Bull? Is it going to be Leclerc? Is it going to be Verstappen? What are your thoughts, Adam?
Mercedes. No, I'm joking.
Wow, that new floor is great.
Yeah. No, I think it'll be pretty close. I may, would I? I don't know. Yeah, maybe edge toward Red Bull a bit. But I kind of expect it to be quite close. And to be honest, I think whoever wins is going to come more down to planning and whether the team and driver can execute the right strategy and the right moves when required. I think it's going to be close enough that will be the deciding factor rather than the underlying pace of the car.
Yeah. I think my only kind of thought on it is Ferrari, because I think there's a slight underlying porpoising difference. I think it affects Red Bull more than Ferrari over on the bumps. In Bahrain, Ferrari were very, very good in that, but then in Saudi, Red Bull were very good at the top speed. So I don't know. With 4 DRS zones, that could bring Red Bull back into it, because they're good at the high end. But whether the straight's long enough for them to make those gains back on Ferrari, we don't know. Because there's only the one straight in Bahrain really where Verstappen can make those gains, and that was into the first one, the main straight. So it'd be interesting to see. I think, as Adam says, it's going to come down to the execution rather than coming down to one car being faster than the other.
Yeah, and we've got 4 DRS zones for the first time ever this weekend as well with the new layout. Are you a fan of this, Adam?
I think there's 2 DRS detection zones, which is the key point, which I didn't realise when I first heard about that. But yeah, so you get for the first 2, then whoever's behind leading into the first 2 gets it for both. It doesn't matter if they make the overtake. So I think that's good. I think that will kind of, we've seen a lot of cat and mousery with Leclerc and Verstappen in terms of trying to be ahead or behind going into the last DRS zone. But I think they're kind of pretty evenly spaced out, and or the 2 sets of zones are kind of pretty evenly spread out. And I don't think, I think we might see less of that, but I don't know. I don't mind it. I think it will be interesting and hopefully should lead to lots of on-track action.
I think it's Albert Park's an annoying one. This position in the season, I should say, after Saudi Arabia, is an annoying one to judge 4 DRS zones, in my opinion, because I think we have just come from a race where the straights for DRS are so long that they kind of warrant then a pass. But then there's immediately a long DRS zone after that. Whereas in this, we've got really short, sharp, bite-sized DRS zones. And as Adam said, 2 detection points. Then I think people are looking at it going, oh no, it's just going to be cars driving past each other. I think they've forgotten every other race at Albert Park in history where no one could race. So I think we look at it from that perspective and think, they brought the 3rd DRS zone in 2018, and that did help cars just be able to be that little bit closer at the end of the lap. So if this can put it so that with the 9-10 Clark chicane now being 9 and 10 sort of Clark straight swoop, if you will, of what it is now, if that can mean that we've essentially got 2 zones of racing in the track, that can only be a good thing, in my opinion. I think there's been a lot of, I think understandably so, it's come under the prism of a bit of DRS hate, but also just oddness for the way it was used in Prism in Saudi. I think it's just because that was such a unique DRS event that it makes this one worthy of more headlines, in my opinion. Be great for qualifying though. We're gonna have some fast laps around this track. They've cut out a whole chicane, and the cars are just faster in general than they were in 2019. So that's going to be. I think we're going to see some sort of real. I'm trying to figure. I think we're going to get to like the 1:13s. I don't know. I can't remember what pole time was in 2019. Get back to me.
Yeah, I think the average speed is going to be incredibly high. I mean, especially with the ground effect as well of this year's cars. Through the high-speed corners, they are going to be absolutely rapid. So, if we get two cars going side by side into the new turn, I think 9 and 10, the fast left, right. If we get two cars side by side going instead, hold your breath.
11, 12.
Yeah, that as well. So
120.
That's one of my favourite places to watch an F1 car, just in general.
No, that was the pole time, 120.4.
Yeah. So I mean, I think we could well be getting a pole time sort of 1:14, maybe 1:13, that kind of thing. Probably quicker because when I guess pole times, who knows what happens. But
well,
I got the one.
There's quite a limited range of things. You can, I think, there's like two options really. You can get it right or wrong. It's not like there's an earthquake.
I got Bahrain right. There's a thing me and my dad do sometimes. We'll text each other before the start of qualifying, going, "Oh, what do you think the pole time will be?" And we'll both normally be way off, but I got Bahrain this year right, which is ridiculous because it was the newest set of the most open qualifying session of all time. But I'm just excited for this race.
Yeah, I'm very excited too. Shall we make some predictions since we always remember what we said?
No, let's not.
Race.
Let's just end the podcast here.
Cool.
Nigel, why don't we do predictions and then just make Freddie's up for him?
I think it's going to be a Ferrari 1-2. I think Leclerc and Sainz. So that's my prediction. I think Ferrari are going to have a slightly better car this weekend. I think, to be like Freddie said, I think they're a bit more. They've got the car a bit more dialed in, and I think on a new layout like this, that'll be the key factor.
If they've got a slightly better car, do you think that will be enough of a difference to make up for Verstappen versus Sainz? And the fact that, they should be able to beat one of them at least.
Yeah, on pure pace, yeah, but I'm still not convinced by the Red Bull engine problem or the Honda/Red Bull engine problem.
That's a good point, yeah.
That's something that could still be exposed this weekend. And Alpine and Renault as well, because Alonso's using his third engine already this weekend, which is quite unbelievable. But yeah, we've seen with the AlphaTauri, Sonoda and Gasly, they've had issues already. So I'm still not 100% set with the Red Bull power unit yet, whereas Ferrari, I'm quite confident that their cars can stay intact.
Ironically, Alonso's on his GP3 engine right now, so yeah, puns. I don't know what to
stupid joke.
Think. It's not going to be a 1-2. I don't think it is. I don't think there's
no one's unless second.
Unless bar reliability. Although reliability is predictable, so that's kind of swung me. Actually, you've convinced me, Nigel. I think it's going to be a 1-2, but Sainz is going to be in first because I have to go different to you. That's the rules. So,
do you want to say anything, Freddie, to round out your bit of the podcast?
Leclerc, Verstappen, Sainz.
That's probably the one that's going to happen. Where's Sonoda going to finish, and is he going to finish?
Yes, and 10th.
Yes, and 14th.
Ooh, 14 cars.
Make a note of that, Adam. Make sure.
I'm noting it. The other thing that I had noted down
he finishes in 10th, Adam.
The other thing I had noted down, speaking of which, is Albon has a 3-place grid penalty for this weekend after his collision with Stroll.
We all disagree with it.
Silly penalty. Such a silly penalty. I forgot to talk about it on the last podcast. It's a good thing I stayed away from it because it was such a silly. It's one of the silliest penalties I've seen for a long time. I'm not saying. So yeah, if anyone should have got a penalty,
the biggest Alex Albon fan you've ever met.
Yes. Yeah. Well, some people haven't met him. I mean, I've not met Nigel that many times because of COVID, but
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. Anyway.
I know of him.
Yeah, it's just our podcast, Adam. Nigel's just a guest.
Yeah, I am a guest. I'm very
he just happens to be hosting it today.
Yeah.
We're progressive podcast in that way.
our post-race podcast on Sunday or Monday when we do it. We're going to talk about the race as usual and stuff like that, because that's what we do. Thank you for watching. If you're on YouTube, thank you for listening. If you're on Spotify, iTunes, or that other one that I forgot, which lots of people are listening to.
Deezer, Stitcher, Amazon Music. There's a lot of
Apple Podcasts, not iTunes.
Yeah, iTunes hasn't been a thing for about 4 or 5 years now.
Whatever. I don't do iPhone stuff. I've got an iTunes.
That's why I
stuff's the really basic one.
Yeah.
Good job, you're not an optometrist.
We'll see you next time.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.